2015 is coming to an end, and it's been a great year for video games. There have been so many great titles this year, in fact, that I've really struggled to pick a top 10. And as usual, a lot of it simply came down to personal preference. And that's exactly what this is, a list of my personal 10 favorite games of the year. This is not a judgment of quality, as I'm sure some of the things I have to say about a few of these games is going to make rather clear. However, I am quite confident in saying that these are some of the best games that were put out this year, and while many of them have their fair share of problems, every single one of them is worth playing. Halo 5 is a game that I desperately want to like a whole lot more than it allows me to. I love how it plays. It's perhaps the tightest a Halo game has ever been. I enjoyed the campaign scenarios and combat arenas, even if I wasn't a huge fan of the narrative. And I love playing the multiplayer, when it's actually enjoyable. The rank placement procedure and matchmaking seem to be all over the place. Sometimes I'll be in great balanced games that go back and forth right down to a 50-49 finish. But other times, most of the time in fact, one team or the other will just get steamrolled. Plus, the game's new mode, Warzone, which is a very intriguing idea conceptually, bringing some MOBA elements into a first-person shooter, fails to actually be interesting due to its reliance on a microtransaction-based card system, which leads to insane amounts of snowballing. Somewhere at the core of Halo 5 is a mechanically fantastic game that I really like, but there's a lot of technical work to be done in order to fully uncover it and bring it into the light of day. The original Dead Island was one of those games that made you wonder, what if this game was better? There were a lot of really cool ideas there, but none of them were quite ready for prime time when it was first released. Instead of working on the rather poorly received Dead Island sequels, Techland moved on, and after years of hard work, we finally have that mythical game we wanted all those years ago. Dying Light is, quite simply, the concepts from the first Dead Island honed and perfected in a much more open world. Most notably, the worst part of Dead Island was often getting around, so Dying Light made its core mechanic movement. There's parkour, grappling hooks, zip lines, and any number of other traversal mechanics that make getting around the world a breeze once you master them. However, the open world you're moving around does have a drawback that is relatively common in these sorts of games. There's too much to do that doesn't really seem like it has a point. It's a big open world, but a lot of it is kind of filled with junk. However, the game's new traversal mechanics, combined with a tweaked melee combat system, make what was a mediocre zombie game in 2011 a fantastic one in 2015. On the PS3, the term interactive fiction basically meant one thing. You were talking about a David Cage game, a game like Heavy Rain, Indigo Prophecy, or Beyond Two Souls. Each of those games certainly have their own individual merits, but I always found them to take themselves a bit too seriously. They always came off as overly melodramatic in a way they could never really pull off. Until Dawn, however, has no illusions as to what it is. This is a B-horror movie through and through. It revels in the genre's tropes and embraces the cliched roles that each of its actors play, putting their life or their death into your hands. While the game still has the limitations of budgetary concerns, meaning your choices really don't matter that much at the end of the game, it still makes multiple playthroughs a joy with its highly detailed butterfly effect menu that suggests other ways that your choices could have played out. It makes you want to see those differences, no matter how minor they might be. Perhaps even more importantly, Until Dawn really, for the first time, makes me wonder what other sorts of genres would do really well in this format. It doesn't feel constrained to the David Cage-esque drama anymore. It seems like there's going to be some sort of Souls game, even if it is a spin-off, in my top 10 list every year from now on, and I'm okay with that. Bloodborne ditched the shields that so many players, including myself, had become so reliant on, and in doing so, created a much more mobile Souls experience, one that I really enjoyed. Between the lack of shields, the introduction of guns, and its surprisingly different setting, Bloodborne is fully deserving of its unique title. But at its core, it's still a Souls game, and a damn good one at that. Her Story is a game entirely focused on its narrative aspects. The primary activity for the entirety of the 2 hours or so you'll spend playing is simply watching video clips of a woman being interviewed by the police about a crime. But it's how you find those clips that makes it so worth playing. Every time you type a word into the search on this virtual 90s workstation, it finds a handful of videos that contain that term. In order to find more videos, you need to find more keywords. This hunt was by far the thing that kept me the most engaged of any game I played all year. I found myself jumping from keyword to keyword in the search field, scribbling down any word the interview subject uttered that even had the remote possibility of leading me to a new clip, a new answer to the questions I had about the mystery that was unfolding, one that would inevitably lead to yet more questions. The narrative itself ends up being a bit disappointing, but the actress's performance and the act of hunting down the answers is just so utterly satisfying that it places you in the game's world completely and doesn't let you escape until you find the answers that you're so desperately looking for. If you would have told me just a few years ago that the next Metal Gear Solid was going to be one of the best playing stealth games ever made, I would have laughed in your face. The Metal Gear Solid games have been known for a lot of things, most notably their absurd storylines, but their gameplay has rarely been anything more than serviceable. The Phantom Pain switches things around. The story takes a backseat to a superior gameplay experience, which makes me more than a little conflicted about the whole thing. The core gameplay loop is so goddamn good. There are so many ways to approach a single objective, all of them equally effective and equally satisfying. But I also wanted a Metal Gear game, with all the scatterbrained plot points and insane twists and turns, a part of Phantom Pain that simply feels unfinished. The gameplay is incredible, some of the best I've seen all year, but the way the game drills it into your skull, forces you to do similar tasks, sometimes even identical missions, over and over again in order to unlock tiny little morsels of story, annoyed the hell out of me. Add that to some real ugly and wildly confusing microtransaction strategies for what's primarily a single-player game, and you have something with an incredibly well-crafted GUI center of stealth action gameplay that has just been covered by layer after layer of bullshit. And it seems like with each new patch the game receives, the more money Konami wants to milk out of it, and the worse it gets. If I was giving out an award for the biggest surprise of the year, Undertale would take it handily. Until it was released and I started seeing people talking about it, I had no clue that it was even in development. At first glance, the game seems to be a pretty straightforward JRPG in the vein of Earthbound for the Super Nintendo. But not only is Undertale often laugh-out-loud funny, something that games so seldom achieve, but it's also surprisingly touching and insightful. This is one of those games I feel like I don't want to talk about too much, as to not spoil anything. The overarching narrative here is just so well done. It strikes such a wide variety of tones, all of which fit in with the equally amazing environments and characters incredibly well. All that said, the combat system is a bit clunky and often somewhat frustrating, causing me to walk away from the game several times while playing it. But the world surrounding those combat encounters always kept me coming back. From the moment it was first announced, Super Mario Maker had a ton of potential. All of these games that claim to allow you to create whatever you want have that same potential, but so few of them actually deliver on that initial promise. Take Little Big Planet, for example. The creation tools are simply far too complex for most people to use, and so most people just play whatever gets put out by the small percentage of players that put in the work to learn the tools. Super Mario Maker, however, breaks that cycle. Not only is it extremely easy for just about anyone to create levels, but there are huge numbers of people doing exactly that. However, it's sometimes a bit difficult to find the good ones. As usual, Nintendo has very little idea how to properly use the internet. The only real way to share a level is to provide people with a lengthy alphanumeric code. There's no search, no tagging system, and only a very rudimentary what's popular listing, with no ability to filter out certain kinds of levels, such as the ever-present and always annoying auto-playing ones. But if you follow the right people in both the game and on social networks, there's a never-ending flow of incredible new levels to check out, to this day. At some point, I'm sure it'll taper off, and the flow of new levels will slow to a steady drip that will be almost impossible to discover, thanks to the lack of curation. But for now, Super Mario Maker is an incredibly fun way to create and experience other people's creations within a framework that just about everyone who plays games understands. Super Mario. I'm one of those weird people who's always enjoyed Bethesda's Fallout games more than their Elder Scrolls games, but I've always felt somewhat conflicted about my love for both of them. Fallout 4, more than any game that has preceded it, is buggy as hell. Playing on PC, I would somewhat regularly have issues that required me to use the console in order to find a companion that was stuck underwater, or start a follower quest that refused to even begin. But despite all the bugs, I still found myself drawn back to the world of Fallout 4 over and over again, even long after I had exhausted most of what the game had to offer me. I found myself just exploring the world, looking for something, anything that I may have missed during my travels. I had issues with Fallout 4 beyond the bugs. I found the main story and many of the side quests far less intriguing than past entries. The dialogue system has been radically simplified in a way I really don't like. But I still feel the ever-present pull to come back and play more. I'll probably end up having to create a second character just to fulfill that need. I never got far in past Witcher games. I would play a little bit of them, maybe the first hour or so, then move on to the next thing without really giving it a second thought. The Witcher 3 changed that. Despite the fact that it is CD Projekt Red's first truly open-world title, the game does everything right, with a beautiful, sprawling world, a massive amount of meaningful stuff to do within it. The combat is varied and extremely detailed. At the harder difficulties, you have to plan for every major target you take on, gathering herbs to create special oils to coat your weapons with. All things that past Witcher games have had, but here it finally all just clicked for me. Everything came together. Even more importantly, unlike the many other huge open world games this year, I'm hard-pressed to think of a specific area or piece of content I disliked strongly enough for it to make a negative impression on me. I never felt like a piece of the game was rushed or thrown together. Some of the most mundane side quests seemed to have the same care put into them as the main story did. Even the card game, that would have been a throwaway time waster in most other games, has just as much depth as actual collectible card games do. In a year full of games that are full of bugs, half-baked, things that are clearly unfinished, The Witcher 3 is a game that feels like a complete package in a way that very few games still do. So yeah, those are my favorite games of 2015. It really has been a fantastic year for video games. So next week I'm going to put out a video detailing in a much less structured format some of my favorite games that didn't quite make the cut. In the meantime, you can watch my favorite games of last year by clicking on it in the video there. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. And if you want to see the stuff I do every Monday and Friday, be sure to check out my channel and subscribe. Thanks for watching.